I was sitting at the kitchen table when my mother dropped the words like stones into still water. There is no college fund, Alexis. There never was. My father stood beside her, his arms crossed, his face set hard as concrete. I felt my stomach drop. I had been counting on that money my entire life. Every sacrifice I made, every part-time job I took instead of going to parties, every time I chose studying over fun, it was all supposed to lead somewhere. Now they were telling me it was a lie, not a delay, not a postponement, a complete fabrication that had shaped every major decision I had ever made. What do you mean there never was? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My hands felt cold. The kitchen suddenly seemed too small, the walls too close. My mother looked away. My father's jaw clenched. Stop being so entitled, he said quietly. Just because we promise something doesn't mean we could always deliver. You need to grow up and accept reality. The words hung in the air between us like poison. They weren't denying what they had said. They were reframing my trust as weakness, my patience as entitlement, my hope as a personal flaw. In that moment, something inside me fractured. Not just my heart, my entire understanding of who my parents were. The hours after that conversation blurred together. I went to my room and closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. My parents had made me a promise when I was 7 years old. I still remembered that day. We were at my birthday party and my father had pulled me aside. Alexis, we're going to put money away for your college, he had said, smiling. By the time you graduate high school, you'll have everything you need. I had believed him completely. Children do that. They believe their parents when they make promises. They don't understand that adults can change their minds, or lie, or simply decide that promises don't matter anymore. As I got older, whenever I felt scared about the future, I would remind myself, I have the fund. I have the fund. It was like a shield against uncertainty. Now that shield was gone, the worst part wasn't the money. It was the betrayal. My parents weren't denying that they had said it. They were saying that my disappointment was unreasonable. They made me feel like the problem was me, like I was selfish for believing them, foolish for planning my life around their words. That kind of lie is worse than any theft. It makes you question your own memory, your own judgment, your own right to feel hurt. I started remembering other moments that day. When I was 9, my father had taken me to a bank. I remembered the tall building, the gleaming floors, the serious-looking people behind desks. He had held my hand and walked me to a window. This is where your college fund is being kept, safe and growing, he had said. I remembered feeling so proud, so secure. I had bragged about it to my friends. Now I wondered if that day had even been real, or if my memory had invented it to fill the gaps. When I was 12, my mother had brought up the fund during a family dinner. By the time Alexis goes to college, we'll have put away enough to cover everything, she had said to my Aunt Patricia. I had felt so grateful then. So lucky. My Aunt Patricia had smiled at me and said, "You're a smart girl, Alexis. Your parents are doing the right thing." I had nodded, basking in the praise, never imagining that my mother was lying. When I was 15, I had turned down a summer trip with my best friend because I didn't want to burden my parents with extra money. "I'll have plenty of experiences in college," I had told her. She had tried to convince me to go anyway. If I had known then that there was no fund, that I was making sacrifices for nothing, what would I have done? Would I have gone anyway? Would I have felt less guilty about the costs? I realized I had structured my entire teenage years around a promise that had been broken before I even knew it was broken. The year after that conversation, I worked 2 part-time jobs while finishing high school. I told myself I was being smart, being independent. I told myself it was good to have a backup plan. In reality, I was just doing what I had been trained to do, accepting less, asking for nothing, and pretending that sacrifice was virtue. My parents never offered to help. They never apologized. They just moved forward as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't reorganized my entire life around their lie. I started working at a coffee shop on weekday afternoons and a retail store on weekends. My friends would text me asking if I could hang out, and I would say no. I was too tired. I was working too much. I was saving money because I had to, because my parents had taught me that I couldn't depend on them, even though they were supposed to be the people I could depend on most. My parents would ask me how work was going. I would give them short answers. They never asked why I was working so hard or what I was saving for. They seemed relieved, actually. Relieved that I wasn't asking them for anything. Relieved that I was taking care of myself without burdening them. They had taken a promise and transformed it into permission to neglect me, and I had accepted it as my own responsibility. During those months, I became very still inside. I stopped hoping for things. I stopped making plans that required their support. I became the kind of person who expects disappointment because disappointment had become my normal. And the strangest part was that my parents seemed to interpret my quiet acceptance as agreement. They thought I had accepted their version of reality. They didn't realize I was just waiting, watching, collecting small details that didn't add up. My father would sometimes mention money in passing, and those comments started to feel strange. Once, he came home talking about a client dinner he'd attended at an expensive restaurant. Another time, he mentioned that he'd paid for my mother's new car in cash. When I was 17, I overheard him on the phone with someone saying they should check on the education account to see how much it had grown. I froze. Education account? He said there was no education account. He said there had never been one. But he had just said the words. I had heard them with my own ears. My father seemed confident in a way that made me understand something important. He actually believed his own lie. He had rewritten history so completely in his mind that the truth had become the false version. Or maybe he never fully believed the lie. Maybe he was just testing to see if I would challenge him. Maybe he wanted to see if his 14-year-old daughter would be brave enough to say, "Wait, that doesn't make sense." I wasn't. I was too shocked, too confused, too trained to trust adults over my own observations. But I filed that moment away. Education account. He had definitely said education account. As the months passed, I started keeping a small notebook. Not to be dramatic, just to survive. I would write down things my parents said that contradicted each other. The restaurant dinner, the cash for the car, the mention of the education account, the way my mother sometimes got defensive when I asked simple questions about money. It wasn't a big notebook, just a small one I kept in my desk drawer. But it was mine, and it was real, and it was the first thing I had that was actually just for me. The first real crack in my doubt came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was 17, working at the retail store, folding clothes and pretending to care about whether the shirts were arranged by size or by color. A customer came in, and we started talking the way I usually did with customers, polite, friendly, distant. He was older, maybe in his 70s, with kind eyes and a calm way of speaking. He asked me where I was planning to go to college. I told him I wasn't sure yet. I explained that I was trying to figure out what I could afford. He nodded like he understood, and then he said something that made me stop folding. "My name is Frank Chun," he said. "I used to be an accountant. If you ever need advice about finances, come find me. I'm in the phone book." Then he bought his shirt and left. I stood there in the middle of the store, holding a sweater that I would never wear, and I thought about what he had said. An accountant. Someone who understood money and records, and the truth that numbers tell. Someone who might be able to help me understand what had happened to my college fund. The next day, I looked up Frank in the phone book. There were 3 Frank Chens, but only one had a business address. I wrote it down. I didn't go see him immediately. I was still scared. I was still the kind of girl who listened when her parents said not to ask questions. But I kept the address, and I thought about it every day. In my mind, I started planning what I would say to him. "My parents promised me money for college," I would begin. "But now they say they never did. Can you help me understand what happened?" It sounded crazy when I imagined saying it out loud, but it also sounded possible. 2 weeks later, I worked up the courage. I was closing the retail store, and I had the address written on a small piece of paper in my pocket. My hands were shaking as I walked to the bus stop. The bus took me to the downtown area, where the older buildings stood in rows like forgotten soldiers. Frank's office was in a building from the 1970s with beige walls and fluorescent lights. I almost turned around 3 times. His office was on the 3rd floor. The door said, Frank Chun, certified public accountant. I took a breath and knocked. He answered almost immediately, like he had been waiting. Maybe he was. He smiled when he saw me and invited me inside. His office was full of filing cabinets and old computers. It smelled like paper and coffee. You came, he said simply. Most people don't follow up. Most people let fear win. I explained my situation. I told him about the promise, the conversation, the mention of the education account. I told him I didn't know what to do or where to start. He listened carefully, asking questions, writing things down. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Do you remember the name of the bank where your father took you when you were younger? I did. I had never forgotten. I told him the name. He nodded slowly. That bank is still in business, and if a fund was opened in your name, it will still exist in their records. Even if it hasn't been touched in years, even if it's been closed, there will be a paper trail. Accounts don't just disappear. The money might, but not the records. For the first time in a year, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. Not the fragile, naive hope of a 7-year-old who trusts her father. Real hope, rooted in the understanding that truth leaves evidence. That truth is stubborn. I went home that night and tried to act normal. I made dinner, helped my mother set the table, answered my father's questions about work with short, polite answers. Inside, I was trembling. I was planning something. I was beginning to understand that I could be patient and also be strong. I could move quietly and also move with purpose. I didn't have to shout or cry or demand answers. I just had to listen to what the document said. Over the next few weeks, I continued my usual routine. I went to work. I came home. I did my homework. I was the perfect daughter, quiet, grateful, asking for nothing. And while I was doing all of that, I was also watching my parents more carefully. The way my father would sometimes talk about money with confidence, as if he had plenty of it. The way my mother would get defensive when I asked innocent questions about our family finances. The way they seemed so certain that I would never find out the truth. I started to understand something that made me both sad and angry. They had probably forgotten what they had done. Or maybe they had convinced themselves so completely that their version was the true one that they couldn't even see the contradiction anymore. That's the thing about lies. If you tell them long enough, if you commit to them hard enough, they become real to you. They become the story you believe about yourself. I wasn't angry at them yet. I was angry at myself for letting their story become my story, for accepting their version of reality instead of trusting my own memory, for making myself smaller to fit into the space they had left for me. 3 months after meeting Frank, something perfect happened. My Aunt Patricia came to visit. She was my mother's sister, and she was the one who had praised my parents that night at dinner when my mother was lying about the college fund. She arrived on a Saturday morning with 2 suitcases and a bottle of expensive wine. My parents were happy to see her. They made a big breakfast, and they all sat around the table laughing and talking about family things. I was cleaning up in the kitchen when my Aunt Patricia came in to help. She asked me about school, about my jobs, about my plans for college, and I made a decision in that moment. I decided to tell her the truth. I kept my voice steady. I told her that my parents had said there was no college fund. I told her I was confused because I remembered them talking about it many times. I told her that my father had even mentioned an education account recently. I watched her face carefully. At first, she looked confused. Then she looked shocked. Then she looked angry. That's not true, she said quietly. Your parents opened that fund when you were born. I remember because they asked me to contribute. I put $2,000 into it myself. She was staring at me, trying to understand why I was asking. Alexis, are you telling me they said there was no fund? I nodded, and Aunt Patricia's face went pale. She set down the plate she was holding, and I could see her thinking, calculating, understanding. Wait here, she said. She left the kitchen. I heard her talking to my parents in the living room. I heard my father's voice, low and defensive. I heard my mother's voice making excuses. And I heard my Aunt Patricia's voice, getting louder, saying things like that's fraud, and you can't just take money that isn't yours. The conversation stopped. There was silence. Then my Aunt Patricia came back into the kitchen and asked me to sit down. She had her phone in her hand, and her expression was serious. "We're going to figure this out," she said. "Right now." Aunt Patricia called Frank directly. I had given her his number. She explained the situation while I sat at the kitchen table, listening. Frank asked to speak to me, and I took the phone. He told me to go to the bank on Monday with my birth certificate and social security card. He said he would meet me there. He said the bank would have records of any account opened in my name, and we would be able to see exactly what happened. My Aunt Patricia stayed with us for the entire weekend. She barely spoke to my parents. The house felt different, charged, like a storm was coming. My mother tried to act normal, but her hands shook when she poured coffee. My father locked himself in his office and didn't come out until dinner. Nobody wanted to talk about what was happening. It was like a secret was sitting at the table with us, taking up space, making us all uncomfortable. On Monday, I went to the bank with Frank. We walked to the teller window, and I told them I wanted to inquire about an account opened in my name when I was a child. The teller asked for my identification. She typed some things into her computer. Her expression didn't change, but I could see her reading something on her screen. Then she said, "Please follow me." She took us to a manager's office. The manager was a woman about my parents' age. She had a sympathetic face. She explained that yes, an education account had been opened in my name in 1997. She explained that it had been opened by my parents with a substantial initial deposit. She explained that the account had been active and growing for many years. She also explained that in 2019, the account had been closed and the funds transferred to another account. Frank leaned forward. "What account?" he asked. The manager showed us the paperwork. The funds had been transferred to a joint account belonging to my parents. There was no record of what happened after that. But what we didn't know was this. My college fund had existed. It had grown, and my parents had taken it. I thought I would feel vindicated when I found out. I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I felt a kind of deep, quiet grief. I had been right all along. My memory had been accurate. My parents had not just lied, they had stolen from me. And more than that, they had forced me to doubt myself. They had made me question whether my own mind was reliable. That might have been the cruelest part of all. Frank sat beside me in that bank manager's office and said, "What would you like to do?" It was a simple question, but it contained so many other questions. Did I want to confront my parents? Did I want to take legal action? Did I want to try to recover the money? Did I want to tell other people? He was giving me the power to decide what happened next, and that power was both thrilling and terrifying. I asked the bank manager how much money had been transferred. She looked at the document and said, approximately $47,000. I felt the number hit me like a physical force. $47,000. That could have paid for most of my college. That could have meant I didn't have to work 2 jobs. That could have meant I wasn't drowning in anxiety about my future. That could have meant I wasn't walking around carrying the weight of my parents' broken promise. But it was also just a number on a piece of paper now. The money was gone. My parents had spent it. I would never get it back. The question was what I would do with the truth that I had found. I told Frank I wanted to think about it. He gave me his business card and told me to call him when I was ready. He said, "The truth is yours now, Alexis. Nobody can take it away from you." I held that card so tightly that it bent. I needed something real to hold on to. I needed to know that this had actually happened, that I wasn't imagining it. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I went back to Frank's office and we made copies of the bank documents. He helped me create a simple timeline of when the account was opened, when deposits were made, when the transfer happened. He showed me the signatures on the documents, signatures that matched my parents' signatures on other papers he had seen. He explained the legal definition of what had happened. They had access funds set aside for my education and redirected them to their own use without my permission or knowledge. "This is fraud," Frank said quietly. "Whether you choose to pursue it or not, you should know what it actually is. Your parents committed fraud against you." The word felt heavy and strange. Fraud. It was a crime. It was something that happened to other people in stories in the news. It wasn't something that happened in my house, with my parents, in my own family. But it had. It was real. I didn't tell my parents I knew. I just continued living in that house, going to work, going to school, pretending everything was normal. But now I was watching them with new eyes. I was watching the way my father would mention how they had recently paid off the mortgage on the vacation house. The vacation house that I had never been invited to. The vacation house that existed because of my $47,000. I was also watching to see if they would ever say anything, if they would ever apologize, if they would ever acknowledge what they had done. They never did. They just lived their lives as if the truth didn't exist. By the time I graduated from high school, I had a plan. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, and I was ready to reclaim something more important than money. I was ready to reclaim my life. I had been accepted to a good state university. I was going to take out student loans if I had to. I was going to work my way through college. I was going to do it all on my own terms, without my parents' help or their lies. I had also made the decision to confront them, but I was going to do it on my terms, in my way, when the moment was right. Frank had advised me to wait. Let them become more comfortable, he said. Let them think the secret is safe. Then, when they don't see it coming, the truth will hit harder. It wasn't a kind strategy, but it was an honest one. The graduation ceremony happened on a warm afternoon in June. My parents came, of course. They took pictures. They smiled. They told me how proud they were. I smiled back and said thank you. I had become very good at pretending. That summer, I worked as much as I possibly could. I saved every dollar. I didn't go on vacation with my parents. I didn't ask them for money for college supplies or dorm room decorations. I just worked and saved and waited. And I spent time with Frank, learning about accounting, learning about how to read financial documents, learning about how to ask the right questions. He became like a grandfather to me, the kind of person who believed in me when I didn't entirely believe in myself. In August, my parents threw a small party before I left for college. Just family, some close friends. It was supposed to be a celebration. My mother had made my favorite foods. My father kept putting his arm around me and saying how proud he was. But everything felt hollow. Everything felt like a performance. During the party, my father was talking to one of his colleagues about how great it was that I was going to college and how much my parents had sacrificed to help me. The colleague complimented him on being such a supportive father. My father beamed like he had just been handed an award. In that moment, I realized something. He actually believed his own lie. He had rewritten the story so many times in his head that he genuinely thought he was a good parent. He thought his sacrifices deserved recognition, when the truth was the opposite. I watched him accept praise for destroying my trust. I watched him smile and laugh and act like he was a hero. And I stayed quiet. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I just smiled and excused myself to the bathroom, where I texted Frank. "I'm ready," I wrote. "What do we do?" His response came immediately. "You tell the truth. You tell it clearly, calmly, and you do it in front of witnesses. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be undeniable." I walked back into the living room and sat down on the couch next to my grandmother, who had come to the party. I looked around at my family, all these people who thought they knew me, and I realized that nobody really did. Not anymore. A week later, my grandmother asked me to come to her house before I left for college. I didn't tell her why I was going, but she knew. My Aunt Patricia had told her everything. When I arrived, my grandmother, Frank, and my Aunt Patricia were all sitting in the living room. They had been waiting for me. We sat together quietly for a moment. Then my grandmother said, "Alexis, your Aunt Patricia has told me what happened. I want you to know that I believe you. I want you to know that what your parents did was wrong. And I want to help you decide what comes next." I explained to them what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a family meeting. I wanted to present the documents. I wanted to give my parents the opportunity to tell me the truth themselves. And I wanted witnesses so that if they tried to deny it or gaslight me again, there would be other people who could confirm what had actually happened. I wanted to put an end to the lie, not through anger, but through absolute, irrefutable truth. Frank nodded. He pulled out a folder with copies of all the bank documents, the timeline, everything. "This is yours," he said, handing it to me. "This is the evidence. This is your armor. My grandmother said I'll host." I'll call them and tell them we're having a family dinner. They won't suspect anything. Aunt Patricia said, I'll be there with you. No matter what happens, you won't be alone. I felt tears in my eyes, but not the sad kind. These were tears of relief. I had spent so long carrying the secret alone, and now I had people who believed me, who had my back, who understood that the truth was important. I wasn't crazy for questioning my parents. I wasn't selfish for wanting answers. I was brave. 3 days later, my parents arrived at my grandmother's house for what they thought was a casual family dinner. They had no idea what was waiting for them. My grandmother had made their favorite food, just like any other dinner. But this time, Aunt Patricia and Frank were sitting in the living room. My parents' faces changed when they saw Frank. They didn't know him, but they somehow understood that his presence meant something serious. My grandmother asked everyone to sit down. She explained that I had something to share, and that she wanted everyone to listen carefully. I was shaking, but I had prepared what I was going to say. I had written it down and practiced it in front of the mirror 100 times. When I was 7 years old, you promised me that you would set aside money for my college, I said, my voice steady and clear. You told me this many times over the years. When I was 9, Dad took me to a bank and showed me where it was being kept. When I was 15, you denied that the fund ever existed. You told me I was being entitled. You told me to grow up and accept reality. My parents started to interrupt, but my grandmother held up her hand. I continued, but I found out the truth. The fund did exist. It was opened in my name. It grew over the years, and in 2019, you transferred all $47,000 to a joint account in your names. You took money that was meant for my education, and then you lied about it. I opened the folder and showed them the bank documents. I showed them the timeline. I showed them their own signatures, authorizing the transfer. I watched the color drain from their faces. My father started to say something, but no words came out. My mother stared at the documents like they were written in a language she didn't understand. I'm not here to punish you, I said. I'm here to tell you that I know the truth, and I'm not going to let this lie define me anymore. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Then my father did something I didn't expect. He stood up and walked out of the house. He just left. My mother started crying, saying that she was sorry, that it wasn't her fault, that my father had made her do it. She was making excuses, still not taking real responsibility. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I looked at my grandmother. I looked at Aunt Patricia. I looked at Frank. They were all looking at me with expressions that said the same thing. You did it. You told the truth. And you survived. Later that evening, my father came back. He sat down on the couch and he said, "You're right. I did it. We did it." He didn't try to excuse it anymore. He admitted what he had done, and he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I wouldn't forgive me. But his admission didn't change what had happened. It didn't give me back my $47,000. It didn't undo the year of doubt and confusion. What it did do was give me back something more valuable. The certainty that my mind was reliable, that my memory was accurate, that I could trust myself. My parents had tried to make me doubt myself, and they had almost succeeded. But I had chosen to dig deeper. I had chosen to seek the truth. And in doing that, I had chosen myself. After that night, things changed in my house. My parents were quieter, more withdrawn. They didn't know how to be around me anymore, now that I knew the truth and wasn't pretending otherwise. In some ways, they had lost power over me. They couldn't lie to me anymore and expect me to believe them. They couldn't make me feel like I was crazy or ungrateful. The spell was broken. I didn't take legal action against them. Frank offered to help me explore that option, but I decided against it. What I wanted was more important than money. I wanted my life back. I wanted to stop being the daughter who was waiting for something that would never come. I wanted to be the daughter who had come through something difficult and come out stronger on the other side. When I left for college a week later, my parents helped me move into my dorm room. We didn't talk about what had happened, but something was different. I was different. I wasn't carrying the weight of their lie anymore. I had set it down and I wasn't picking it up again. I had student loans to pay back. I had part-time jobs lined up on campus. I had a future that I was building with my own hands, on my own terms. And somehow, that felt like more than any college fund could have ever given me. Because it was mine. All of it was mine, and nobody could take it away. During my first year of college, I didn't contact my parents much. A few phone calls on holidays, short text messages. I was building a new life, one that didn't depend on them or their broken promises. I was also building something else, a new version of myself, a version that trusted her own mind, a version that didn't accept lies as truth just because they came from people she was supposed to believe. Frank became my mentor. He taught me about finances, about accounting, about how to read documents and ask the right questions. He told me stories about other people he had helped, people who discovered that they had been cheated or defrauded by people they trusted. The truth always comes out, he said. It just takes patience and courage. My Aunt Patricia and I started having regular dinners together. She wanted to make sure I was okay, and more than that, she wanted to acknowledge what I had done. She said, a lot of people would have just accepted their parents' version of reality. You didn't. You asked questions. You sought answers. That's something special, Alexis. By the end of my first year, I had saved enough money working on campus and had been clever enough with my student loans that I could see a path forward. I wasn't going to be debt-free when I graduated, but I was going to be okay. And more than that, I was going to be independent. In the summer after my first year, my father came to see me. He drove to my college town and asked if we could have coffee together. I almost said no, but I decided that I wanted to hear what he had to say. Maybe I was ready to listen. Maybe I wasn't. I didn't know until I sat down across from him at a small cafe and saw his face. He looked older, worn down, like the secret had aged him, or maybe finally telling the truth had. He ordered coffee and he sat quietly for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he said, I can't undo what I did. I know that, but I want you to know why I did it. He explained that when the economy had crashed, he had made some bad investments. The college fund had started to diminish, and he had panicked. He didn't want to tell me that the money wasn't there. So instead, he had started telling himself that he would pay it back. He would make up for it. He had meant to, he said. He had actually believed that someday he would rebuild the fund and give it back to me. But then the years passed, he said, and it got easier to pretend it had never existed. Somewhere along the way, I stopped lying to you and started just living in the lie. I stopped being able to see the difference between what I had promised and what I had done. That's not an excuse. I'm just telling you how it happened. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Not what you did, what you let yourself become. You let yourself become a person who could lie to your own daughter and actually believe you were right to do it. He nodded. He didn't argue. He just said, I know. After my father left that day, I realized something. I had gotten what I needed from him. Not an apology, exactly, though he had given me one. What I had gotten was an explanation that was honest and didn't try to minimize what he had done. And more than that, I had gotten to see him actually understand, on some level, what his lies had cost me. But the truth was, I didn't need him to understand for me to be okay. I was already okay. I was doing better than okay. I was thriving. I had friends. I was doing well in my classes. I was building a life that didn't depend on him or my mother or anyone else. I was free. I started to understand that revenge isn't about making someone else hurt as much as you hurt. Real revenge is about succeeding despite them. It's about building something good, something real, something that proves that you're stronger than whatever tried to break you. I changed my major to accounting, not because I wanted to punish my parents, but because I wanted to help people like me. People who had been lied to, cheated, who needed someone to help them find the truth in the numbers. I wanted to be like Frank, someone who believed people when they said something didn't add up, someone who was willing to dig deeper. By my senior year of college, I had made a decision. I was going to work for Frank for a while before going out on my own. He was aging, and he didn't have anyone to take over his business. But more than that, I wanted to learn from him. I wanted to understand how to be the kind of person who helps others uncover the truth. My parents and I had found a kind of truce. We didn't have a close relationship, but we weren't estranged either. My mother had tried to build bridges. She wanted things to go back to normal. I told her gently that things could never go back to normal because we couldn't unknow what we knew. But we could move forward. That was all I could offer her. The day I graduated from college, my entire family came. My parents, my grandmother, my Aunt Patricia, and Frank. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I looked out at them sitting in the audience, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't anger either. It was peace. I had done something they never thought I would do. I had taken their lie and turned it into proof. I had taken their betrayal and turned it into strength. I was graduating debt-free because I had been smart with my money. I was graduating with job offers because I was good at what I did. I was graduating as someone who didn't need their college fund anymore. Starting work at Frank's office felt like coming home. He had his back surgery scheduled, and he knew he was going to need someone reliable to help carry the business. He trained me carefully, showing me every case he had worked on, every client he had helped, every truth he had uncovered in the numbers. Accounting is just storytelling, he told me one day. The difference is that these stories are backed up by evidence, and evidence never lies. I thought about my parents' story, the story they had told themselves about the college fund, about their finances, about who they were. That story had fallen apart the moment it met the evidence. Because evidence is stronger than any lie. Evidence is the truth speaking for itself, clearly and without emotion. I started my own clients quickly. Word got around that there was a young accountant in town who was good at finding truth in the numbers, who cared about helping people who had been defrauded or lied to. I got calls from people who had been cheated by business partners, stolen from by family members, gaslit by people they trusted. I helped them find the evidence. I helped them see that their doubts were justified. I helped them reclaim their power. 3 years after college graduation, I had my own office in the same building as Frank. He had mostly retired, but he still came in 2 days a week, mentoring me and drinking coffee and telling stories about cases he had solved decades ago. He was like the grandfather I had never had, the person who believed in me when it mattered most. I had also reconciled with my parents, not by pretending the lie had never happened, but by accepting that they were flawed people who had made a terrible choice. My mother came to my office once. She sat down and asked if I would help her understand some financial documents that my father had been keeping hidden from her. Apparently, he had been hiding money again, and she was worried. I helped her. I found the evidence, and this time, she didn't deny it. She faced it. My parents' marriage didn't survive the truth. They separated 2 years after that. My father moved into an apartment and started going to therapy. My mother stayed in the house with the vacation mortgage that had been purchased with my college fund. Their lie had cost them more than it cost me in the end. It had cost them their marriage, their dignity, their self-respect. But I didn't feel triumph about that. I just felt sad. I felt sad for what they could have been if they had just been honest. If they had told me the fund was gone and asked me to help figure out a plan together. If they had treated me like a partner instead of an obstacle. Instead, they had chosen to lie, and the lie had destroyed everything. Today, I'm 25 years old. I run a successful accounting practice. I have helped dozens of people uncover the truth about their finances, their families, their lives. Frank comes in and sits at the desk next to mine, and he tells people that I'm the most intuitive accountant he's ever trained. That I have a gift for finding what's hidden. But the real gift wasn't something I was born with. The real gift was what I learned the hard way. That truth is stronger than any lie, that patience is more powerful than anger, and that the best way to overcome betrayal is not to punish the person who hurt you, but to build a life so good that their hurt doesn't matter anymore. My parents didn't give me a college fund, but they gave me something more valuable. They taught me not to accept lies as truth. They taught me that my memory and my intuition matter. They taught me that I have the power to find answers if I'm willing to look for them. And most importantly, they taught me that I don't need their help to succeed. I never did. I keep that bank document in my office, the one showing the moment my college fund was transferred away. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of strength. As a reminder that I asked a question when I could have stayed quiet. That I dug deeper when I could have given up. that I chose the truth, even when it hurt. Sometimes new clients come in and they tell me similar stories. They tell me about promises broken, about money missing, about people they trusted who lied to them. And I tell them the same thing Frank told me. The truth always comes out. It just takes patience and courage. Do you have both? Every single time they do. Because when you're brave enough to seek the truth, you become the kind of person who can handle it.